I wasn't exactly in a position to be picky about jobs. When you're behind on rent, eating ramen twice a day, and your car won't even start, a paycheck is a paycheck. So when I saw a flyer pinned to a gas station bulletin board offering cash for night shifts at a roadside repair shop, I called immediately. No questions asked. The ad didn't give many details, just a name and a phone number scribbled at the bottom. It felt sketchy, sure, but I was desperate. When the guy on the other end said I could start that same night, I didn't even hesitate. The shop was smaller than I expected, tucked away off a lonely stretch of highway I didn't even know existed. It was a dump, tools scattered everywhere, an old radio hissing static on the counter, and flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry bees. The air inside smelled like grease and rust, and the road outside was eerily quiet, almost like the world forgot this place existed. My new boss, a wiry guy named Ed, handed me a list of rules without so much as a welcome before he climbed into his truck and sped off, leaving a cloud of dust behind him. The rules? They were bizarre. Stuff like not taking money from someone's left hand and turning off all the lights at exactly 3:33 a.m. I thought it was some kind of weird hazing or joke, but Ed's last words, "Follow these or you won't last long," echoed in my head. The first few hours of my shift were quiet. Too quiet. I kept waiting for a car to roll in, but all I got was the occasional distant rustle of wind through the trees. The isolation started gnawing at me. To distract myself, I organized tools and fiddled with the ancient radio. It sputtered static no matter what station I tried, but every now and then, I'd catch a faint voice or snippet of music. Around midnight, headlights finally broke the darkness. A beat-up sedan pulled in, its tires crunching the gravel. The driver, a middle-aged guy with tired eyes, stepped out, glancing nervously over his shoulder like he was expecting someone, or something, to show up behind him. "Just a flat," he muttered, barely looking at me. As I got to work, something felt off. The car was freezing to the touch, like it had been sitting in a meat locker, and I swear I saw scratches on the bumper that looked like claw marks. I tried not to think too hard about it, focusing on the repair. When I finished, the guy reached into his pocket and handed me a crumpled bill with his left hand. My gut tightened as I remembered the rules. I hesitated, then shook my head. "Can't take it," I said, trying to sound casual. He froze, staring at me with this unsettling, almost predatory look. Then, without a word, he stuffed the money back into his pocket, climbed into his car, and drove off, tires screeching as he disappeared into the night. After the guy sped off, the silence around the shop felt heavier, like the air itself had thickened. I kept telling myself I did the right thing following the rules, but my nerves were shot. I tried to focus on cleaning up, but my hands were trembling. Around 1 a.m., the stillness was shattered by a low, rumbling sound. At first, I thought it was thunder, but it grew louder, more mechanical, like an engine, but wrong. It wasn't coming from the road. It sounded like it was circling the shop, growling and revving, but no headlights pierced the darkness. Every instinct screamed at me to look, but I forced myself to stay inside. Then the radio crackled back to life. Not music or static this time, but voices. At first, they were faint, garbled. Then I heard my name, clear as day. It wasn't just once. It repeated over and over in this monotone, robotic voice. "Mike! Mike! Mike!" My legs locked up, and I couldn't bring myself to turn it off. I just stared at the radio as it hissed and popped, the voice blending with static. The rumbling outside stopped abruptly, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt suffocating. That's when I noticed something, a shadow moving across the far wall of the shop, even though there was no light to cast it. I froze, watching the shadow slide across the wall, slow and deliberate, like it was testing me. My mind raced through the rules. No headlights, no visible car, and definitely no human explanation for what I was seeing. That shadow shouldn't have been there. I backed away, gripping the nearest wrench like it would do any good. The shadow moved closer to the window, and for a split second, I thought I saw the outline of something, long arms, a hunched posture, but then it was gone, leaving me in darkness. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might give me away, but the shop stayed silent except for the faint hum of the flickering lights. I thought the worst had passed until I heard it, footsteps. Not outside, but inside the shop, slow and deliberate, like someone or something was taking its time. My throat went dry as the steps grew louder, circling just beyond the edge of the light. I glanced at the clock, 3:27 a.m., 6 minutes to go until I had to kill the lights. I gritted my teeth and kept my eyes on the clock, but every step made my skin crawl. The wrench felt useless in my hand, but it was the only thing between me and whatever was out there. By 3:32 a.m., the footsteps had stopped, but the silence was worse. It felt like something was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a mistake. My hand shook as I reached for the switch to kill the lights, my fingers hesitating over it. The rules, I reminded myself. Follow the rules. With a deep breath, I flipped the switch, plunging the shop into complete darkness. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then I heard it, a low, guttural rasp, like someone exhaling right behind me. I froze, too scared to even turn my head. The sound grew louder, closer, until it felt like it was coming from inside my own head. My chest tightened, and I fought the urge to scream. Something brushed the back of my neck, light as a feather, but cold enough to make my entire body seize up. My knees buckled, and I dropped to the floor, clutching the wrench like a lifeline. I squeezed my eyes shut, whispering every prayer I could think of, waiting for whatever was behind me to make its move. But it didn't. The rasping sound faded, leaving me in suffocating silence once again. When I finally dared to open my eyes, the darkness was absolute. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face, but I didn't dare move. The air felt charged, like the room itself was alive and watching. Then came the sound of something metallic scraping across the floor. Slowly, deliberately. It wasn't random, it was moving toward me. I felt the vibration through the concrete, each drag growing heavier, like whatever it was testing its weight. My grip tightened around the wrench, but my hands were so clammy I thought I might drop it. The scraping stopped just a few feet away. My breath caught as I heard a faint clicking sound, almost like nails tapping against metal. The rules didn't say what to do in a moment like this. All I could do was stay still and hope the thing didn't notice me, or whatever it was would decide I wasn't worth the trouble. Then, without warning, the lights flickered back on. It took my eyes a second to adjust, but when they did, I wished they hadn't. Standing in the center of the room, where the scraping had stopped, was a figure. It wasn't human, not entirely. Its limbs were too long, its head tilted unnaturally, and its skin was so pale it almost seemed to glow. Its eyes, black pits that seemed to suck in the light, locked onto mine. My body refused to move. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I was rooted to the spot, trapped in its gaze. The thing tilted its head further, like it was curious about me. Its mouth twisted into a grin, full of teeth too sharp and too many. It didn't make a sound, but the room felt like it was vibrating, as if its presence alone was distorting reality. Then it started to step forward, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. Each step it took felt like the air grew heavier, pressing down on me, making it harder to breathe. I snapped out of my paralysis just enough to scramble backward, knocking over a toolbox in the process. The clang echoed through the room, and for a brief second, the creature froze. That's when I noticed its shadow, or lack of one. The lights were on, glaring and fluorescent, but it cast no shadow against the floor. That detail made my stomach churn in a way I can't explain. It was wrong, all of it was wrong. I grabbed the wrench and swung it in pure panic, but before it could connect, the lights flickered off again, plunging me back into the void. The darkness was suffocating, thicker than it had been before, and I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or shut. The wrench felt useless in my hand, but I held onto it like it was my last tether to reality. My heart pounded so hard it echoed in my ears, drowning out everything else, until I heard it. Breathing. Deep, slow, and wet, like something huge and unnatural was inhaling the room itself. It wasn't just behind me this time. It was everywhere, surrounding me, filling the air with a low vibration that made my teeth ache. Then the sound of footsteps returned. Not one set, but many, circling the shop, moving closer with each pass. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to keep my back covered, but the cold metal against my spine reminded me just how trapped I was. A faint glow flickered to life outside the window, red and pulsating, like a heartbeat. I couldn't see what it was coming from, but I could feel its pull, like it was calling to me. The temptation to look was overwhelming, but the rules hammered in my head. Don't look out the window. Don't break the rules. My grip on the wrench tightened as I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting every instinct to peek. The glow outside grew stronger, bleeding through the edges of the window like liquid fire. Even with my eyes shut, I could feel its presence, oppressive and all-consuming. The footsteps inside stopped, replaced by a low scratching sound, like nails raking across the walls. It was close, too close. My whole body was shaking, but I kept my back pressed to the wall, clutching the wrench like it was my lifeline. The radio crackled to life again, spewing static mixed with distorted voices. At first, it was incomprehensible, but then it became clear. Break the rules, and it will take you. The words repeated, each time more warped, more urgent. My breathing was shallow, my chest tight. The glow outside flickered violently, and the scratching on the walls turned into pounding, slow and deliberate, like something was testing the strength of the shop. The air was thick with tension, and I was certain it was only a matter of time before whatever was outside decided to come in. Then I heard a voice. Not the distorted ones from the radio, but clear, sharp, and right next to me. Look, it wasn't a suggestion. It was a command, low and guttural, vibrating through my skull. My eyes snapped open involuntarily. When my eyes opened, I regretted it instantly. The glow outside wasn't just light, it had form. A mass of shifting shapes, writhing and twisting, pressed against the window like it was trying to seep through. It wasn't solid, but it wasn't smoke either, and within the swirling red light there were eyes. Dozens of them, watching, blinking in unison. The sight was so unnatural, so wrong, that it sent a jolt of nausea through me. I forced myself to look away, but the image burned behind my eyelids like an afterimage, refusing to fade. The pounding on the walls stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so heavy it pressed on my ears. I didn't dare move. My grip on the wrench was so tight it made my knuckles ache. Then, as if in response to my fear, the glow outside started moving, circling the building, searching for a way in. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, but where could I go? The rules didn't cover this, and my mind raced with questions I didn't want answers to. The radio crackled again, this time with a single word, repeated in a whisper that chilled me to the core. Choose. The word echoed in my head. Choose. What was I supposed to choose? My fight or flight instincts were warring, but there was nowhere to run and nothing to fight. The glow outside pulsed faster, casting brief flashes of red into the room through the window. Each time it illuminated the shop, I could see things, shapes, silhouettes, impossibly tall and thin, shifting in the shadows. My gut told me they weren't fully here yet, but they were close, waiting for the smallest mistake to pull me in. The clock caught my eye, 3:33 a.m. My hand moved instinctively to the light switch. The rule said the lights had to stay off, and I wasn't about to break them now. As my fingers brushed the switch, a sound stopped me cold. It was the engine, the one from before, the deep, guttural rumble that couldn't belong to any car I'd ever heard. But this time it wasn't outside. It was inside the shop. The walls trembled, and the air reeked of burning oil and something metallic like blood. I turned, and there it was, a car. My truck, sitting dead center in the shop, its headlights off, its windows dark. But something was in the driver's seat. I couldn't breathe. My truck shouldn't have been there. I'd parked it out back before my shift started. Yet there it was, its frame impossibly pristine, cleaner than it had ever been, like it just rolled off the factory floor. The windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see inside, but I knew something, or someone, was sitting in the driver's seat. The longer I stared, the more I felt it staring back. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to take a step closer, gripping the wrench so tightly it bit into my palm. Then, the headlights flared to life, blinding me. I stumbled back, shielding my face, but the light wasn't normal. It wasn't just bright. It felt alive, like it was burrowing into my skull, searching for something inside me. A low growl emanated from the truck, vibrating through the floor, and I realized it wasn't just a machine anymore. It was watching me, waiting for me to act. Slowly, the driver's window rolled down, and I saw them, eyes. Not human, but red and glowing, set deep into a face I couldn't fully process, like my mind refused to understand what I was looking at. The eyes burned into me, twin pinpricks of red that seemed to pulse in time with the glow outside. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. It felt like they had me locked in place, pulling me closer with every second. The figure in the driver's seat didn't move, but the air around it shifted, distorting like heat waves off asphalt. My knees buckled, and I fell to the floor, the wrench clattering out of my hand. The radio crackled back to life, spitting out static and those same warped voices. "You broke the rules," they hissed, the words overlapping in a mocking chorus. I tried to think, what rule had I broken? The lights were off, I didn't look directly at the glow outside until it was unavoidable, and I hadn't touched any money with a left hand. Yet the figures outside, the thing in my truck, and the voices on the radio all seemed to converge on one thought: I was guilty. The truck's engine roared to life, deafening and guttural, filling the room with vibrations that rattled my teeth. The glow outside surged, spilling into the shop through the cracks in the walls, forming jagged streaks of crimson light. I curled into myself, covering my ears, but it was too late. The sound, the light, the pressure, it all slammed into me at once. I don't know how long I stayed like that, curled up on the floor, hands over my ears, as the world seemed to tear itself apart around me. The roar of the engine, the crackling of the radio, the pounding in my chest, it all blended together until it was just noise, endless and consuming. And then, just as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. Silence fell over the shop, so abruptly, it was almost worse than the chaos. My ears rang, my body trembled, but I didn't dare move. When I finally looked up, the truck was gone. The glow outside had disappeared, leaving the room dimly lit by the faint flicker of the fluorescent lights overhead. The shop was empty, as if nothing had ever been there. But the air felt wrong, thick with the lingering scent of burnt oil and something sharper, like iron. The radio was dead, the static gone, and the clock on the wall blinked 12 o'clock, its hands frozen. My body screamed at me to run, to leave this place and never come back, but when I stood, I noticed something on the counter. A slip of paper, stained and crumpled, with one phrase scrawled in red ink: "Until next week,